So here we step into the ethical quicksand about euthanasia and assisted suicide. Because remember that the doctor is supposed to be, and nurses too, are supposed to be bound by the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm, right? And you can do harm then by withholding treatment. So at what point does offering treatment cause harm? So it gets thick quickly. So I mentioned the Hippocratic Oath earlier, and I said I would come back to it. This is that point. And so remember, this is Hippocrates, the Greek man who was considered to be the first doctor. It really means he's the first doctor in the West, and because most of American, which really means British, culture comes from the Enlightenment. It's taken from the neoclassical world, which is basically the Greeks, the world of the Greeks, and Hippocrates there is understood to be the first physician. So the Hippocratic Oath has been modified, as I said a couple of times ago, a couple of lectures ago, when I was talking about this. That it used to read, first do no harm, and which is I think a good way to start. But then we get into the definition of harm and what does harm mean. So we could say, well, harm means keeping somebody alive against their will, which seems harmful, psychologically and painful. Anyway, the Hippocratic Oath includes two key passages, and it gets now this long thing that is read out to people when they graduate. I will apply for the benefit of the sick all measures that are required, avoiding those twin traps of overtreatment and therapeutic nihilism. Now, this is really interesting, okay? And you can see where it's much more spelled out. It's like, no, we're going to actually take on this issue of, these ethical issues. So let me go back to that for a second. I will apply for the benefit of the sick, right? All measures that are required. Okay, that are required, which means what? We don't know. Like, what's your definition of required? Avoiding those twin traps of overtreatment. So just keeping people alive no matter what. And therapeutic nihilism, where you basically say, well, it doesn't matter what we do, the person's going to die. Most especially must I tread with care in matters of life and death. If it is given me to save a life, all thanks. But it may also be within my power to take a life. This awesome responsibility must be faced with great humbleness and awareness of my own frailty. Above all, I must not play at God. So this is very intriguing language here. Because it's still religious in so many ways, and it has that sort of odor to it because of the language that's used. If it is given to me to save a life, well, who's going to give it? It just happens. It's just the way it, it's like, but who? So if it's given to you, like, does somebody, a voice come down from the clouds and say, here, it is given to you to save a life? It's like, what greater power is handing this to you? Well, people believe that, right? Okay. All thanks. Okay, so yes, thanks to greater powers. So in other words, Magic Man in the clouds, right? The same guy who delivers your presents on Christmas morning and Easter eggs. But it may also be within my power to take a life. Okay, well, that's probably true for most doctors and many nurses, that they are probably in a situation where they could, if they worked at it, take a life. This awesome responsibility must be faced with the great humbleness and awareness of my own frailty. Okay, fine. So I'm not fond of the word frailty here, but I get the picture. That basically we are going to suffer from our own. We're going to put ourselves in the position of the person and say, my God, that's just too terrible to be born. Okay. Above all, I must not play at God. So, well, how do you get out of that one? And ideally, you have a discussion about it with somebody. You don't just make this decision alone, but you talk to the family if you can. According to the majority of doctors today, this passage has a lot less relevance than it did in Hippocrates' time. The alternative Declaration of Geneva, which is related to the Geneva Conventions, is more secular, and I certainly, the following is part of that. At the time of, and you'll hear how much it's much more, this is much more just sort of like pragmatic. At the time of being admitted as a member of the medical profession, the health of my patient will be my first consideration. Okay. I will not permit considerations of age, disease or disability, creed, ethnic origin, gender, nationality, political affiliation, race, sexual orientation, social standing, or any other factor to intervene between my duty and my patient. Okay, so now here's some spelling out of these vague areas, which are like, let's just be clear about this. You know, is this person worth less than the person next to them because they make less in the year, or because their skin color is different, or because they don't sound as nice, or they don't make you laugh, or in fact you don't like them at all those things. I will maintain the utmost respect for human life. I will not use my medical knowledge to violate human rights and civil liberties, even under threat. Okay, yeah, so, you know, this is sounding a bit more legal and a bit more, I'm like, yeah, I'm down with that one. Because it's like, yeah, it's going to have to be defended in a court of law. So I would like it to be, I'd like to hear exactly what your terms are, instead of using things like, you know, I'm frail. It's like, frail? What does that mean? You know, it's like, well, I was frail. It's like, you were frail at the time, and that's why you kept my loved one alive and tortured them, basically with extra pain. Is that your frailty? So indeed, when the Hawk anesthesiologist, a doctor and so a captain, wonders why he's being forced to treat an enemy soldier, he's told, presumably because of the Geneva Convention, Capitan, says Cavendish. Jewett turned the oxygen on. Bunch of fucking liberals, he growled. So, this is on 232. So here's the problem of what happens, and necessarily is going to happen. It's not as though your doctors don't have politics. They have politics. They vote. They're going to believe in this and not that. They're going to, you know, and you may very well land up on their table, and you couldn't be more different from each other. And still, what you want from the doctor is a fair shot, so to speak. Note that O'Neill lets you know the ethical issues are clear. Sure as hell somebody'd find him out, says the anesthesiologist. Like, he knows, you know. Be like that My Lai thing everybody was pissing and moaning about in the States right now. I'll come back to this in the next little bit. This is on page 235. And causing the patient agony is not only fine with the doctor, he's actually great with it. I mean, he enjoys it. This is what he lives for, right? Hot damn, he felt good. He felt better than he'd felt since his God-blasted day had begun on 238. So what Vietnam did was to remind us and show us that post-World War II, again, the North Americans could be lousy human beings and could act as badly as any torturers. And before you ask me, no, Nazi doctors didn't take the Hippocratic Oath. They didn't need to, and they knew they were going to treat Aryans and well, and everybody else was going to get the shaft. And if they needed to torture people and vivisect them, that is, you know, do a live dissection, they're like, yeah, that's fine with us. It's okay. Okay. Let me just say one little last note, because I see I'm leaving O'Neill at this point, is that O'Neill, like many of these nurses, is a very thoughtful, reflective person, and extremely pragmatic, but also very, very genuine, and which I think you probably get from the stories. I think this book of hers, Don't Mean Nothing, which was one of the phrases that the veterans would say to each other. You know, something terrible would happen, and the way they would handle it and begin to get over it and sort of produce this linguistic scar tissue would be to say, don't mean nothing. So Don't Mean Nothing became one of the it's kind of like saying whatever, except it's meaningful, and actually it's a way of handling pain. Okay,